From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Some people are convinced that Mexico has a Bermuda Triangle all its own, something called the Mapimi Silent Zone, also known as Mexico's Zone of Silence. Here are the facts.
Yes. So we'll call it a lot of things. I'm probably going to end up saying this silent zone many times in this episode, but the Mapimi Silent Zone, it's an area of desert, basically, if you look at it, and you can go and look at it right now. Mapimi Silent Zone, or if you head on over to Google Maps or Google Earth, keyhole, you can find it. Just look for Mapimi Biosphere Reserve, and you can check it out in all its glory. Turn on the satellite imagery there, and you can see what we're talking about. It is located near the Bolson de Mapimi in Durango, Mexico. And this is a site of, it's really a seabed. This whole area is a huge seabed, and it used to be literally underwater in this thing called the Tethys Ocean. It existed between Gondwana and Laurasia during the Mesozoic era, and that is a long time ago. There wasn't, the Tethys Ocean isn't this new ocean you've never heard about that's, on planet Earth right now. This existed way back when. But something that's really cool in this area is that because it was a seabed and it had all this water, it had creatures living in it, there are all kinds of fossils that can be found across this reserve.
Yeah, when we're talking about the Mesozoic era, we're talking about a planet that looked very different. The Gondwana and Laurasia are, in a very real way, the ancestors of continents that we see in the modern day. And there are a lot of salt deposits there too, because it used to be under the ocean. This place has a lot of history, but it's not a lot of human history. It's still a pretty rural area. And if you have heard about it, if you've heard about it and you don't live around the area, then it's almost certainly because you have a personal interest in stories of the unexplained. So for a little more than the past 50 years or so, since the 1970s, people across continental North and South America have spun some really bizarre tales about the Silent Zone, or the Zone. You'll hear reports on various forums and then sometimes on radio shows that radio and television signals become scrambled in this area, that if you have a compass, it will refuse to function, or that you will...
By the way, just before you move on to the next things, Ben,
yeah.
That definitely reminds me, and I'm sure you listening too, of Bermuda Triangle.
Right, exactly. And there are a couple of extra add-ons that you get if you pick. I don't know why I'm saying it like they're on a menu, but if you
got extra fixins?
Extra fixins, they do. They have extra fixins in the Mapimi Silent Zone. There's a rumor that you will see extraordinarily large people who suddenly vanish or disappear into thin air when they're spotted. But the most titillating tale about this zone involves an electronic malfunction. So the Bermuda Triangle has this rep for being a place where a lot of watercraft and aircraft disappear or crash, or their instruments stop working, right? Similar to the Mapimi Silent Zone, but they only have one famous case of an electronic disaster, and that's a missile that was launched from the U.S. and somehow completely missed its landing spot, and it ended up about 400 miles or 644 kilometers south of its intended target. We'll talk about that a little more, because this is a key piece of the story and the legend.
And we even have a a report in a newspaper from that time about this occurring that we found,
Yes.
which is really fun.
Yes, yes, and can be relatively rare to find those kind of primary sources for stories like this. Oh, like that time we did the Dragons Triangle in the Pacific. It was tough to find something substantial there. But with this, like, let's say you're a person who is a dyed-in-the-wool true believer in the concept of something extraordinary happening at the Bermuda Triangle. Well, if you have that perspective, when you look at the Mexican zone of silence, you'll see another similarity that might convince you the rumors about this zone are true. And it's this: the zone is located, like the Bermuda Triangle, between the 26th and 28th parallels. So if you're pulling a Charlie Day, conspiracy board thing, or like a Matt and Ben conspiracy board thing, that's definitely something you connect with red string, right? And then next thing you know, you're talking ley lines to someone.
That's it.
That's where we're going, right?
Yeah, because the only reason in my mind that I'm interested in the latitude of wherever we are is because a ley line might be there, man. Come on. And they don't always follow latitude. Sometimes they go all kinds of different ways, zigzagging around. Ley lines are awesome. They're probably, at least to my knowledge, not real, but they're really cool to look into.
It's you know what it is? I think it's an awesome idea. It's an awesome theory, and I love seeing ley lines used in works of fiction. As far as the concept of ley lines now, to be absolutely fair, we have to say there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people who believe in some version of this interconnected network of lines spanning Earth, and and along these lines, there's the transmission of this vaguely defined Earth energy, right? So science rejects this, but a lot of people will swear by it. And if you believe in ley lines, then you would maybe think of that as one of the possible explanations for the zone of silence.
Remember, as we say on the show all the time, we can't prove everything yet. It's also very hard to disprove certain things. Because, but ley lines, fascinating. We should at least keep that in mind when we're talking about this today.
Totally. And you know what? We should also just do an episode on ley lines.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, I'm going to write
Let's
that
go
down.
Find some.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think we could get on the road now. Come on.
I think so. And it'd be a fun road trip adventure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let us know if there are any ley lines near Nashville. Just putting that out there. Just let us know.
Or actually, this is a little bit of a spoiler. This will come out, I think, in time. But write specifically about a place that you would like us to visit on the international sphere. We don't have to be restricted to the U.S. And I might be lighting out for the territories in a few months temporarily for some stuff, but I will, I think, have the capacity to travel. It depends. Just let us know. We'll start a list. Of creepy places across the world that you want us to visit, and we'll do our best to get to a few of them in the future. Matt, is it okay that I'm volunteering us for this?
I mean, I won't get into your personal life, Ben, but
Okay.
You can essentially go wherever you want, whenever you want, okay?
Well,
I'm kind of stuck here. I got a crazy dog that eats things if I leave, so...
Well, I can't go to the stands. You know that, right? Like
I know.
I could go and they'd let me in, but getting out is a whole other bag of badgers. Anyway, that's not what this episode is about. This episode is about this the legend of this immensely creepy place, or at least that's what people want you to think it is. And we have to start out by saying, look, the idea of a part of the world where radio signals and TV signals just don't work is a real thing. These places are proven to exist. I've been to one of those. We've talked about it in the past on the show, the U.S. National Radio Quiet Zone. But in that case, the disturbances in communication there are all the consequences of human design. Uncle Sam actively clamps down on modes of communication to ensure that it gets top performance from this enormous radio telescope they built. And that makes sense. It's still creepy and X-Filesy, but we know who was doing it, and we know their official reason for why they're doing that. But the Silent Zone appears to be different.
Certainly. And here's the deal. Before the 1970s that we mentioned earlier, when all of these rumors started to occur, this area was not seen as anything spooky. It was the desert area, kind of in the middle of Mexico there. It gained its reputation in the 70s. So really what this episode is about is, how did that reputation begin? What kinds of sightings are alleged to have occurred there? And what's going on right now? What's going on in the zone of silence, or this reserve? Really, it's a nature reserve. So I don't know, Ben, are you ready for it?
Yes, absolutely. The funny thing about this, I love that you point this out, Matt, some of our fellow conspiracy realists listening today were alive before this zone gained its dubious, infamous reputation. So what happened? Why do so many people around the world believe Mexico has a Bermuda Triangle all its own? Here's where it gets crazy. Just like with the Bermuda Triangle, some strange stuff really has happened in this desert. It's just maybe not as many strange things as legends would have us believe, and maybe not the type of strangeness that rumors would have you believe. I think we should go back to the story of the rocket crash, Matt, because it really happened, and not only did it really happen, it was worse than it might sound at first. It's not like accidentally popping a firework into your neighbor's backyard.
No, we're talking about a warhead attached to a giant propellant machine known as a rocket. It was really bad. So this is 1970, the year exactly 1970. There's a report that we'll refer to in here that was in the Toledo Blade that was published on August 4th of that year. It is titled "Mexicans Find Errant Rocket." We'll discuss that further, but let's give you the details here. 1970, it's kind of weird. It's in July. It's early July, somewhere between the 2nd of July and the 11th of July. There was a test rocket. It was an Athena V-123D or 123D. It was launched from the Green River Launch Complex out there in Utah. And it was supposed to be heading from its launch destination out to the White Sands Missile Range. That's out in New Mexico. Makes sense. You're testing a missile with a warhead in a place that does that. But for some reason, and again, it is unknown, or at least the reporting that we have found doesn't state exactly why, and the government and the people testing it maybe didn't want anyone to know why, it ended up crashing somewhere between 180 and 200 miles south of the Mexican border. Like we said, around 400 miles from its intended destination.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, right? And we have an unexpected cameo in this story, a guy who's somewhat like the Darth Vader or the Senator Palpatine of geopolitics, real politics at least. Yeah, who could it be? Can we get a scary sound cue, Paul? That's right. It's Henry Kissinger, who is still alive.
Yes.
He was the national security advisor at the time, and he sent this pretty short, little innocuous memo to the president where they vaguely listed the cause of the malfunction as, quote, abnormal re-entry into the atmosphere. Basically, they said, something went wrong, we're not sure what. This memo is pretty short, and it has a lot of no biggie energy. Like, we're letting you know what happened. Don't worry, Mr. President. Also, they noted the Mexican government was willing to grant clearance and assist in any search efforts. But the problem with this memo is that it is, like Emily Dickinson, it's telling the truth, but it's telling it slant. The truth is not as cut and dried as the memo made it seem. This cleanup effort was long and was going to be expensive, and it included things like the construction of a road and rail through the desert to excavate hundreds of tons of soil from that impact site. And that's because this was not an ordinary test rocket. This rocket was dirty in a very dangerous way.
Yeah, it had this cobalt junk in there. But before we get into that, Ben, can I just read just one part word for word here from that memo?
Oh,
just
please
so everybody
do.
understands what you're talking about. It says, since the missile made an abnormal re-entry into the atmosphere, it is believed that less than 100 pounds of debris actually impacted the ground. The precise location of impact has not been determined, but the general area is known to be sparsely populated. Sorry.
No, I love this. I'm clapping. I'm in awe. I feel like I'm in an actor's studio. Also, I did not know that Kissinger wrote so many memos while he was on the toilet.
Oh, God.
He's a multitasker, isn't he?
Sorry. That was so gross.
That was
Maybe
perfect.
I should retract and redact all of that, just like the previous couple of lines from where I stated there.
Oh, yeah. The memo is partially redacted for sure. But I think at this point we can guess that what they're redacting here are some specific details about their overall program, and they mention the missile, but what's probably redacted here is what that missile was carrying and what it was supposed to be testing for.
Well, and it is important that the debris impacted the ground, right? So the missile exploded. At least according to this memo, it's thought that the missile exploded maybe before hitting the ground. So it was a debris field rather than an impact site.
Right, yeah. This wasn't a case of some ginormous cylinder just sort of hitting the ground and going thump, thump. Yeah, you're right. It was a rain of debris. And this is especially dangerous because of that cobalt 57. The Athena test rocket was not your garden variety test rocket, or at least not what the U.S. public would have thought of when they thought of a test rocket. It had these two vials of this isotope, cobalt 57, and they weren't conducting just pure research studies with that. There was no question of like, let's see what happens to cobalt when you put it in and out of the atmosphere. No, instead, cobalt 57 was intentionally included with these kinds of missiles because it could enhance radioactive fallout. It could contaminate large areas of land. The street name for this kind of weapon is a salted bomb, which already sounds kind of creepy because, you know, it's clearly a biblical reference. So the earth was salt.
Well, yeah. I mean, this sounds like the worst possible idea. Hey, guys, we have a nuclear weapon. What we're going to do is devise a way to enhance the radioactive fallout. Wow.
This is very Illumination Global Unlimited. Like, are you concerned your nuclear weaponry is not destructive enough?
That's what it says on the side of the box. Enhances all nuclear fallout. Enhance your nuclear fallout with cobalt 57.
Yeah, we worked so hard on this bomb. The last thing we want is people and animals being able to return to the land at some point. I mean, geez, this was a whole weekend for us.
That's really messed up, guys.
It is, and maybe I'm being a little unfair because from all the available evidence we can find, and we are getting to the silent zone. This is very important for this story. From all the evidence we could find, this was a genuine mistake. This was not some nefarious fake whoopsie on the part of Uncle Sam. But it was part of a larger problem, which was that malfunctions plagued this rocket program at the time and led to it eventually being closed for a while. So
that's the Athena, by the way.
Yeah, that's the Athena. Yeah. So there you have it. We've got a story that normally would have stopped there The takeaway is accidents happen. Everyone be cool. Follow Kissinger's lead. You know what I mean? And also, because this is such a rural area, very few people actually saw the crash. Hardly anyone saw it, but those who did see it did not receive an official explanation for a while. And without any kind of statement from the Mexican government or the US government, they came to their own conclusions, and these varied widely. We've got three examples. The third one is probably my favorite.
Well, yes, the first one here is most certainly biblical. I remember reading stories about this happening. Yep, when I was studying the Bible in school. This a few shepherds that happened to be in the hills out in that area perhaps thought this was an angelic presence that had made its way down from the heavens and it had fallen, or perhaps a demonic presence, as in a fallen angel, right? Who knows what was going through the shepherds' minds, but there was definitely a flash of light that occurred that these shepherds saw, and then they applied their own beliefs to it.
Yeah, yeah. And then people in nearby towns that would have visibility of this and happen to be looking in the right direction saw a flash of light and they said, okay, maybe it's a very bright falling star, or maybe it's a meteorite. But my favorite example is there's this one rancher in the area who was furious. He didn't care whether it was an angel or a meteorite. He had no idea it was a missile, but he wouldn't have cared about that either. He was pissed, and he was trying to figure out who he was supposed to be ticked off at, because the crash panicked all his cattle. They broke out of their corrals. They were running wild, and he was like, someone must answer for this disturbance. And so when the government eventually came looking for its missile, the U.S. government, we mean, they accidentally threw more and more gas on the fire of speculation, because picture this. You're a resident of this area. You live near this area, and you know something is up because you're seeing a lot of like soldiers and military personnel doing stuff, but no one's telling you what's going on. Speculation is going to run wild. They're trying to keep this operation secret, but it's simply impossible to keep a recovery operation of that scale secret in this sort of environment. And nobody, like, they were so focused on making this operation secret that they didn't ask the locals what they saw. They didn't ask where they thought something might have landed. So if you're in Mexico at this time, it's like a real life Men in Black, but they're not interviewing you. They don't want to mess with you. Nobody's talking to the rancher. He's just getting more and more upset and furious. Like he's reaching like Bill Burr levels in my head of outrage. And instead what they did was they hired people from a place called Gomez Palacio to quietly search the area, the Bolson, for the missing missile while U.S. planes flew overhead to look for it that way. And then that compounds the paranoia and the problem, because, you're an average resident here. You've probably never seen this many planes flying over your part of the world for this long, right? So it took them 3 weeks to find the wreckage. This thing was mostly, what was left of it was buried nose first in a sand dune. The fact that it took 3 weeks can give you a sense of how rural this area is. They formed a local security force to protect the missile once they found the crash site, to keep away vandals, sightseers, possibly looters. And the person who was running this security force was a local town resident. His name was Gonzalez. And if you go there now, you'll see that there's a little marker commemorating him at the site. There's a small hill in the reserve that overlooks the zone of silence, or where the zone of silence was at the time they erected that monument. See, that's a spoiler. It's a little bit of foreshadowing.
Oh, Ben, just want to jump in here really quickly, talk about this Toledo Blade article from August 4th, 1970. Mm-hmm. It's interesting as we're talking to you about this, because the reporting that we've found online that exists right now, contemporary stuff from the 2000s, some of it from the 1990s, it does give you a slightly different story. This article from 1970 also was a little, I don't know if it's off, if it's more accurate. We honestly can't tell right now, because it states that, first of all, the United States admitted that this happened early on, and that they contacted Mexico and the officials there in the government to get them to assist. So, like, they're saying they're very upfront about it, and they're also saying that the United States admitted immediately that there were, I believe it says, minute quantities of radioactive cobalt involved.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I couldn't tell you, just basing it on the other sourcing that I found, because this is an outlier, I would say, for sure.
Well, yeah, here's what happened. They told the truth to the U.S. public, U.S. reporters. They told the truth to the Mexican government, but they didn't tell the truth to the people who lived there.
Got it. Okay.
That's where I think they made a misstep, and unless somebody in this area had a subscription to newspapers from Toledo, which is not impossible. I don't know. That's just a hell of a ride for the paper boy.
Agreed.
But you're right. You're right. There were what are called information asymmetries there. In short, there's a quiet invasion that occurs. The U.S. government ends up building an airstrip near the missile's crash site, and they set up a camp. They build a special extension from this railroad to this sand dune. They dig out the missile, they dig out the dune, they put everything into bags, they take all the soil they think might be contaminated, and they load it into the train and onto these planes. They take it away, and then they ghost. They ghost the town, and they take the railroad with them. They leave the airstrip, though, and this airstrip and the remnants of this dune are the basis of what will become later known as the Zone of Silence. So far, it's understandable if you're thinking, hey guys, you're telling us, you said you were going to talk about the Zone of Silence, but you've just spent like 20 minutes telling us the ins and outs of this weird missile crash where it sounds like there wasn't anybody conspiring. That is mostly true. There wasn't a huge cover-up, or there wasn't something that lasted very long, but there is another conspiracy. It is a conspiracy directly related to the reputation of the Zone of Silence today. Matt, I say we take a break for a word from our sponsors and return to solve the mystery of the Zone of Silence. We're actually going to solve this one, folks.
Fully?
Well,
let's do it.